Australia, land of extremes, often hostile, endlessly enchanting. From the red centre, where barren deserts bloom, to mysterious Lake Eyre, a ghost that comes and goes. From the Flinders Ranges, where nature broke settlers' hearts, to Kakadu and the monsoon's dazzling explosion of life. These are wonders to behold. These are riches of deserts and wetlands. Looming from the red heart of Australia, Uluru, the great monolith, a freak of nature, revered by both Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians alike. A cluster of sibling formations juts from the horizon within sight of Uluru. Once called the Olgas, these blushing domes now go by their Aboriginal name, Cartajuta. Together, these rocks are the focus of the World Heritage-listed Uluru Cartajuta National Park, covering more than 1,300 square kilometers. This most conspicuous of landmarks was named Ayers Rock by European explorers. It's so significant to the Aborigines that its original name, Uluru, has been restored. It's a towering presence in the flat landscape, nearly 350 meters high, 3 kilometers long, and up to 2 kilometers wide. Yet what you see is merely the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the rock is buried as much as 6 kilometers underground. Originally, Uluru was created under an ancient inland sea, as sediment was deposited in horizontal layers. Violent earth movements pushed the rock upwards, the original layers becoming the vertical ribs seen today. The Anangu people have their dreaming or creation stories to explain shapes in the rock. The pockmarks were left by the spears of poisonous snake men, and the cracks were made by an enraged python woman striking out at her enemies. Cartajuta is also a highly sacred place to the Aborigines. It was once a single landform, until an ancient upheaval opened up joints which eventually eroded away to form gorges. Today, the 36 domes of Cartajuta stand alongside Uluru as geological monuments in a vast sandy desert. Eons of weathering and leaching of nutrients has left the desert soils impoverished. In a place characterized not by abundance but by diversity, only the most specialized plants and animals endure. hardy desert survivors scour the landscape for scarce food and water. Red kangaroos, the great desert nomads, travel far in search of grass that grows after storms. Birds, like zebra finches, are quick to locate pools filled by rain. Uluru's caves provide shelter from the heat for masked wood swallows. In the cool of the morning, they come out into the open to search for insects. By drinking on the wing, they avoid attack from predators like snakes. The caves also offer protection from birds of prey. For desert animals, the search for a meal is constant. A death adder homes in on a skink. A kestrel has spotted it too. Where food is scarce, it's first in, first served. Animals, plants, the earth itself, all are fundamental parts of the Australian Aborigines universe. This precious tribal knowledge has been passed down through generations of Central Desert people, through storytelling. Traditionally, one of the most important ways was through rock art. Now, paint and canvas is the medium for telling the timeless stories of the dreaming. Central Desert Aborigine Johnny Possum Japaljarri captures this world. Meandering lines are a common motif in Aboriginal painting, often representing journeys of ancestral beings. Journeys that leave telltale tracks, another frequent symbol in their art. In Aboriginal custom, a man cannot paint another man's dreamtime story. Japaljarri is the keeper of the ring-tailed possum story. The faintest of prints in the sand are like words on a page to the desert people.
Kangaroo, come. Navia, that's kangaroo.
Tracks are the signatures of the animals, revealing what made them, when they were made, and where the animals are likely to be hiding. Japaljarri lines the journey path of the possum ancestor with decorative dots. Much of the landscape dot painting of the Central Deserts is in the style of a map viewed from above, showing the tracks, rocks, creeks, and plant life. Japaljarri completes his painting by depicting a desert blooming after rains. At such times, grevilleas and desert roses decorate the sand dunes with splashes of color. Rain in the desert brings a breath of cool, fresh air, and plants and animals are quick to respond. Beautiful desert oaks bloom, attracting many birds, such as honey-eaters that feed and nest in their branches. Red kangaroos make the most of the new grass, and for them, rain and plentiful food is the signal to begin breeding. Far from the confines of the pet shop, wild budgerigars start breeding in enormous colonies as soon as there is water and grass seed about. They sweep across the plains in their hundreds of thousands, one of Australia's most spectacular wildlife displays. After rain, Uluru is like an island oasis in a sea of sand. In the cool shadows, pools of water linger, sustaining both animals and plants. Another oasis of the Red Centre is the spectacular Kings Canyon. It's part of Wataka National Park to the north of Uluru. Sheer walls, plunging more than 100 meters, were formed when the massive sandstone range split away at a vertical joint. The resulting canyon became a time capsule of rare, ancient plants that existed across Central Australia millions of years ago. Under the protective shade of the cliffs, more than 50 rare plants survive around the waterholes. Here, the McDonnell Range's cycad grows, a primitive plant from a far wetter past, one that you would expect to find in a forest, not a desert. Temperatures in the interior can soar to 50 degrees Celsius. While the blistering heat is debilitating for most creatures, that's not so for the reptiles. Since they depend on warmth to drive their metabolism and movement, this is truly the land of the lizard. There are more lizards here than anywhere else in the world. Most obtain all the moisture they need from their prey. In times of drought, meals can be few and far between, but insect eaters, like the thorny devil, are rarely without supplies. In the heat of the day, a hunter-scavenger prowls the low desert scrub, tasting the air with its tongue for any scent of prey, either dead or alive. The parenti is Australia's largest lizard. It can grow to more than 2.5 meters. But most desert lizards are finger size, making them bite size for another creature, a relative newcomer to the desert. It's a formidable, indiscriminate predator, the feral cat. Although they're not native, millions of domestic cats now call Australia home. Feral cats have a devastating impact on native wildlife. Biologist Rachel Pragtige is finding out why. She's particularly interested in learning how the common cat can possibly survive in the Tanami, one of Australia's most hostile deserts. Wild cats are highly elusive, and Rachel's challenge has been finding any at all.
Stop here, stop. Over there.
She enlisted the help of local Aborigines, skilled in desert tracking.
Cats are not adapted to long distance running. They actually tire out quite quickly. This is how Aboriginal people are able to capture cats, initially following their tracks, then flushing the cat out. There's no way that I'd be able to capture cats without the help of the Aboriginal women.
So that cats can be located and their pattern of movement followed, each is fitted with a radio transmitter.
Let him go.
Let him go. I'll leave it here.
Next day, Rachel picks up signals from kilometres away.
Aboriginal trackers can interpret from its tracks where it's gone, exactly how far it's travelled last night, how many times it's pounced on prey, what it's eaten, how many times it's sat down, what's happened when it's met other cats, pretty well everything that's happened.
Rachel's work has revealed how cats survive in the desert. Like their reptile prey, they can live on just the moisture in their food and don't need to drink. The more we understand about the behavior of feral cats, the greater will be our chances of counteracting them. The success of the cat threatens many native species with extinction. Most at risk is the mala, or rufous hair wallaby. Fewer than 400 remain on mainland Australia. Their only hope is to be protected in fenced enclosures until cats are controlled. It's hoped that one day these rare animals will reclaim their rightful place in the dry, sandy expanse of the Red Centre. Uluru, not a lonely sentinel in a harsh, barren land, but an integral part of a dynamic desert environment. Together, the rocks and wildlife of the Red Centre create a rich and extraordinary landscape, alive with the spirit of the dreaming. billabong, a word as sweet as water to a thirsty man. Brimming billabongs and flowing creeks were life itself to early pastoralists. The inland of South Australia. This is how it looks in a good season. Back in the early 1850s, similar conditions encouraged pioneer settlers to venture inland. Pushing their sheep further and further north, they reached the Flinders Ranges. What they found here excited them. They settled, built their homes, and began to live off the sheep's back. The pastoralists were not to know that this seductive land also had a dark side. The Flinders Ranges stretch for 420 kilometers and embrace 3 national parks. They're only 1,000 meters high, but set against endless flat plains, they have a majesty all of their own. The ranges present a dramatic contrast to the continent's parched interior. Emus thrive in the valley woodlands, living off grasses and shrubs. Echidnas fossick for ants and termites among the leaf litter. Lizards soak in the sun, ever wary of birds of prey. A kite rests in a gum tree between hunting forays. The stately river red gum is a symbol of the Flinders Ranges. Its elegant form graces the riverbanks and creek lines. Hundreds of years old, the gums have endured the ravages of countless floods, droughts, and fires. Their abiding spirit is best captured in Harold Casno's famous photograph of 1937, titled "The Spirit of Endurance." The same tree still stands here today. It's the high walls of the Flinders that make possible an abundance of life in this arid region. They deflect moist warm air upwards, where it cools, condenses, and falls as rain. Nowhere is the effect more striking than in Wilpena Pound. It was once a deep valley enclosed by high mountains. Now it's eroded to a vast basin, some 11 kilometers long. Like a fortress, it holds back the relentless march of the desert. Outside its ramparts, the land is dry and dusty, but inside, lush grasses and forests flourish. When settlers first arrived at the Flinders Ranges, there had been long periods of good rain, and feed was plentiful. The circular walls of the pound made it the ideal grazing run. Their flocks soon thrived. There were entire forests of cypress pine for building and fencing. stone was plentiful and houses could be built easily. But all was not rosy. With rain the grass grew, but so too did introduced weeds. The Salvation Jane, or Patterson's curse, that painted the hills with colour, was potentially poisonous to stock. Worse still, from 1864 to 1866, not a drop of rain fell. Sheep and cattle perished. Many runs were deserted as settlers fled back to the coast, to places where rainfall was more reliable. While the red gum endured, the will of the settlers collapsed, along with their dwellings. The stone ruins a testament to a pioneering spirit that fought against unbeatable odds. Elsewhere, a reminder that human habitation in the Flinders was a very recent event indeed. In Brashner Gorge, there are rocks which tell a story of another age. Here there's a fossil legacy from 500 million years ago. At that time, the Flinders were flooded by sea, and only the most primitive life forms existed. These beautiful patterns were once living corals that inhabited shallow waters when the only life on land was bacteria. As well as bearing treasure from the distant past, the rocks of the Flinders are home to a living treasure: the yellow-footed rock wallaby. They are nimble, fast, and able to leap up and down rock faces with ease. The rock wallabies share the cliffs with the wedge-tailed eagle. Australia's largest bird of prey, its wings span more than 2 meters. The eagle's powerful talons can exert more than 2 tons of crushing weight. The yellowfoot's young stay hidden among the rocks when danger lurks. Human hunters have posed a much greater threat to the wallaby. Highly prized for its soft gold coat, the animal was shot to the brink of extinction. Today, with the protection of national parks, yellowfoot numbers have bounced back and their future looks bright. After 2 centuries of European settlement in Australia, we now understand much more about this land and the vagaries of its seasons. We know that the true bounty of the Flinders Ranges lies not in farming, but in its natural heritage. The clock has been wound back to a time before grazing, and the Flinders Ranges have been returned to nature for safekeeping. Ghost lakes. That's what Australia's inland lakes are sometimes called. And like ghosts, they disappear into thin air. Most of the time, they're just dry salt pans. But 3 or 4 times each century, rivers flood with drenching rains that have fallen thousands of kilometers away. The water eventually makes its way to the lowest point of the continent, 15 meters below sea level. This is Lake Eyre, the largest salt lake in Australia. It covers more than 13,000 square kilometers. The floodwaters have swept billions of fish along with them, and the lake bursts into life. Mysteriously, pelicans arrive in tens of thousands from thousands of kilometers away. How on earth do they know that the lake is filling? One theory is that they can sense far distant storms, but the mystery remains. Wildlife cameraman Lindsay Cupper is fascinated by pelicans and their nomadic life. The best way of getting around on the shallow lake is by hovercraft.
I reckon it's probably 10 years since I first thought about making a pelican film. I think it was probably my first visit to Lake Eyre where I first saw them breeding back in 1990. And I thought, gee, what a magic story.
He's been to Lake Eyre many times since and has captured wonderful images of these birds and their behavior. Lindsay lived alongside a colony of pelicans on an island for so long that they came to accept him and his hide as part of the scenery. Pelicans breed as fast as they can while their new food supply is plentiful. In times of widespread flooding, 100,000 birds have been known to breed here, nesting on islands in the lake. Even in years of minor floods, when small lakes form, it's an important breeding ground for a number of different species. So important that Lake Eyre was declared a national park. It's one of the few places where the rare banded stilt breeds. Caspian terns are also visitors to Lake Eyre, where they nurture their young in large colonies. While one pelican parent minds the family, the other will go off fishing, sometimes traveling as far as 100 kilometers to find a good spot. With their heavy cargo of fresh fish on board, they skim low to the ground on the homeward flight.
It's really fascinating watching pelicans feed their chicks. Small chicks peck their parents' beak to prompt them to regurgitate little fish into the nest. Larger chicks are more demanding. They actually delve their heads right deep into their parents' gullet. Parent bird will let them feed, but obviously when she's run out of fish, she's got to force the chick to get out of her gullet, but then the chick feels it hasn't had enough and just goes into this, it's like a real mental sort of convulsion, and it flaps around and sort of squawks and pecks itself on the wing and just goes absolutely berserk. You'd think the poor thing's absolutely dying, but after a while, when it gets no attention, it gets up and walks away again. When Lake Eyre dries up, the pelicans run out of food, all the fish are gone, and their chicks starve. They make a valiant effort to keep them alive, but in the end they've got to just abandon them and return to the coast.
Eventually, the last of the pelicans will fly from Lake Eyre. What water remains will soak into the desert sands. And the pelicans will find another water world, far from this ghost lake. Far away in Australia's tropical north is a much wetter place. Here, pelicans join thousands, millions of other water birds. This is the renowned Kakadu National Park. For water birds of Australia's top end, the threat of drought is rare, but there is a threat from the animal at the top of the food chain. The Australian saltwater crocodile is the largest reptile on Earth. All lowlier creatures are nervous in its presence. Kakadu is the kingdom of the crocodile. Covering nearly 20,000 square kilometres, Kakadu is Australia's largest national park and a World Heritage Area. It stretches from the coast through river plains to the Arnhem Land Escarpment. 140 million years ago, it's believed that much of Kakadu lay submerged beneath a shallow sea. the sandstone escarpment we see today would once have been sea cliffs. These spectacular rocks rise more than 300 meters above the plains and stretch for more than 500 kilometers. It's a contradictory land of dry tropics and monsoonal flooding, bursting with a rich and unique life. As many as 1,700 plant species flourish here, and more than a third of all Australia's bird species. This Garden of Eden is home to more than 50 types of mammals and over 120 reptiles, from the meek to the mighty. In the wet, when the monsoonal rains come, this great national park roars into life. Waterfalls add their runoff to rivers that become a vast floodplain spreading to the sea. The floodplains have settled at many different levels during the advance and retreat of the ice ages. The Aboriginal people of Kakadu have lived through at least 40,000 years of these dramatic changes. It's the longest continuing surviving human culture in the world. And it's left us with some of the oldest art galleries on Earth, painted more than 20,000 years ago. There are more than 5,000 sites in Kakadu, surely the biggest rock art gallery in the world. In the distant past, Kakadu was a very different place. Much of it was open savanna, where Aborigines hunted kangaroos. In those times, the Tasmanian tiger would also have stalked kangaroos, but it became extinct here about 4,000 years ago. A rock painting of the tiger at Ubia is at least that old. By the end of the Ice Age, 8,000 years ago, sea levels had flooded the lowlands all the way to the escarpment. Then fish became the main game. Turtles, too, were depicted in the rock art, and one of special significance. The existence of the pig-nosed turtle in Australia was unknown to science until its discovery in 1968. Ironically, Aborigines have always been aware of its existence. This ochre image reveals it's been here for thousands of years. At Nourlangi Rock, there is a famous gallery that tells of a creation ancestor, Namargon, or Lightning Man, who conjures up the violent storms that occur every wet season. With the axes on his head, elbows and feet, he splits the dark clouds asunder. Nearby is Namargon's wife and his children. The Kakadu galleries also contain a more recent story about the arrival of Europeans with their guns. Below the stone country of the escarpment sprawls Kakadu's most common vegetation, tropical woodland. Here, some eye-catching characters hang about. The frill-necked lizard is usually a mild-mannered creature. But when danger looms, he undergoes a dramatic personality change. He puffs up his fiery frill, pretending to be larger than life. Stiff rods of cartilage connected to muscles in the tongue and jaw raise the frill. But if a predator is not intimidated by this display, the frillneck resorts to his final ploy: retreat. Also living in the woodland is the top end's largest kangaroo, the antilopine wallaroo. Over the dry season, she survived on a meager diet of roots and tree bark. But with the bad times behind her, she'll soon be anxious to breed again. As more and more water tumbles off the escarpment, rivers overflow to flood the low country in the north. These wetlands are Kakadu's most famous, sprawling across 2,500 square kilometers. This is what people from all over the world come to see. Monsoon, water, plants and heat. Together they act as a perpetual solar engine of life. Everything gathers to make the most of the opportunities to feed and breed. Seeds that have lain dormant in dry mud rapidly sprout, attracting magpie geese back to the floodplain. After months of struggling to find food, they now gorge themselves on the new growth of aquatic plants. But at all times, they need to maintain a wary eye. The geese are joined by elegant brolgas. These birds are famed for their languid dance steps. Fish trapped in shrinking billabongs over the dry season spread out through the floodplain and multiply. Their jumping catches the attention of a pair of white-breasted sea eagles and a black-naped tern. With appetites satisfied, the magpie geese turn their attention to sex. Lovers' quarrels break out as they prepare to mate and nest. At the edges of the wetland, the frenetic activity is replaced by the peaceful pace of life in the paperbark swamp. Breaking the stillness is a busy forest kingfisher with young beaks to feed. Rather than building their own nests, these birds have taken over one built by termites, evicting the tenants and making it their family home. Agile wallabies are also enjoying the growth of the wet season. Here in the forest they can relax, the vegetation providing cover from predators like dingoes. The monsoon season has reached its peak, and now the floodwaters begin to recede. Lotus lilies reach full bloom, and their sweet perfume is irresistible to insects. As they go from plant to plant spreading pollen, they assure the future of their favorite food source. More than 10,000 insect species live in Kakadu. But as always, a beast lurks amid the beauty of Kakadu. One that has stood the test of time, surviving virtually unchanged since the time of the dinosaurs. The saltwater crocodile can grow to more than 5 meters and live for up to 100 years. At this time of year, waterbirds like the egret are dependent on the floodplain to feed and find a mate. Crocodiles need only patrol the shores to find their next meal. They are the masters of ambush. Once they have targeted their prey, they disappear with barely a ripple. Any unwary bird is likely to end up on the crocodile's menu. In Kakadu, the dramatic cycle of life and death is inevitable. But as fearsome as the crocodile is, it's as dependent as any other creature on the lifeblood of Kakadu, water. For as long as monsoonal rains ebb and flow, Kakadu National Park will remain the kingdom of the crocodile and a sanctuary for some of the most exquisite life forms on the planet. By drinking on the wing, they avoid attack from predators like snakes. The caves also offer protection from birds of prey. For desert animals, the search for a meal is constant. A death adder homes in on a skink. A kestrel has spotted it too. Where food is scarce, it's first in, first served. Animals, plants, the earth itself, all are fundamental parts of the Australian Aborigines universe. This precious tribal knowledge has been passed down through generations of Central Desert people, through storytelling. Traditionally, one of the most important ways was through rock art. Now, paint and canvas is the medium for telling the timeless story. Sediment was deposited in horizontal layers. Violent earth movements pushed the rock upwards, the original layers becoming the vertical ribs seen today. The Anangu people have their dreaming or creation stories to explain shapes in the rock. The pockmarks were left by the spears of poisonous snake men, and the cracks were made by an enraged python woman striking out at her enemies. Cartajuta is also a highly sacred place to the Aborigines. It was once a single landform, until an ancient upheaval opened up joints which eventually eroded away to form gorges. Today, the 36 domes of Cartajuta stand alongside Uluru as geological monuments in a vast sandy desert. A cluster of sibling formations juts from the horizon within sight of Uluru. Once called the Olgas, these blushing domes now go by their Aboriginal name, Cartajuta. Together, these rocks are the focus of the World Heritage listed Uluru Cartajuta National Park, covering more than 1,300 square kilometers. This most conspicuous of landmarks was named Ayers Rock by European explorers. It's so significant to the Aborigines that its original name, Uluru, has been restored. It's a towering presence in the flat landscape, nearly 350 meters high, 3 kilometers long, and up to 2 kilometers wide. Yet what you see is merely the tip of the iceberg. The rest of the rock is buried as much as 6 kilometers underground. Originally, Uluru was created under an ancient inland sea as Australia, land of extremes, often hostile, endlessly enchanting. From the red center, where barren deserts bloom, to mysterious lake air, a ghost that comes and goes. From the Flinders Ranges, where nature broke settlers' hearts, to Kakadu and the monsoon's dazzling explosion of life. These are wonders to behold. These are riches of deserts and wetlands. Looming from the red heart of Australia, Uluru, the great monolith, a freak of nature, revered by both Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians alike. Eons of weathering and leaching of nutrients has left the desert soils impoverished. In a place characterized not by abundance but by diversity, only the most specialized plants and animals endure. Hardy desert survivors scour the landscape for scarce food and water. Red kangaroos, the great desert nomads, travel far in search of grass that grows after storms. Birds, like zebra finches, are quick to locate pools filled by rain. Uluru's caves provide shelter from the heat for masked wood swallows. In the cool of the morning, they come out into the open to search for insects.